Drop the name of your city in the comments below, and stay with me all the way to the end. That was what Lena Hartwell told the morning. She packed one bag and drove 4 hours north into the kind of country where the sky goes on forever, and nobody asks you where you've been. She wasn't running. She'd stopped calling it that somewhere around the second hour, when the highway narrowed and the spruce trees crowded in on both sides and the radio lost its signal entirely. She was just going. There's a difference, she thought. There has to be. The ad had been posted on a bulletin board at the feed store in Pemberton, not online. An actual paper notice, handwritten, the kind of thing you'd see in 1987. Ranch hand wanted. Must know horses, no nonsense, room and board included. Ask for Strand at the Coldwater gate. No phone number, no last name. Just Strand and Coldwater, and the implication that if you needed more information than that, you probably weren't the right person for the job. Lena had taken a photo of it on her phone and stared at it for 3 days before she drove up. She was 29 years old. She had a kinesiology degree she'd never used, a lease on an apartment she'd already broken, and 11 years of riding experience that she'd spent most of her adult life pretending didn't count as a skill. Her mother had called it a phase. Her ex-fiancé had called it an obsession. Lena had eventually stopped mentioning it altogether because it was easier than explaining that some people just belong near horses the way other people belong near the ocean, and that this is not a character flaw. She found the gate at the end of a road that wasn't on any map she had. A rusted iron arch with the word Coldwater worked into the metal, the letters thin and old, and still somehow steady. She got out of her truck to open it herself, because there was no intercom, no call box, no signal on her phone. Just the gate and the wind off the mountains, and very faintly, the sound of something moving in the tree line to her left. She didn't look. She opened the gate, drove through, got out, and closed it behind her, and told herself that was a good sign. People who leave gates open can't be trusted with anything. The house appeared after a long bend in the drive, and it was not what she'd pictured. She'd pictured something weathered and half collapsed, the kind of ranch that looks like it's apologizing for itself. This was something else. Stone foundation, timber framing, a wraparound porch that sagged slightly on the north end, but had clearly been rebuilt at least twice. Someone had loved this house enough to keep fixing it. Someone had also loved it enough to leave a stack of split wood on the porch in perfect parallel rows, which told her more about the person inside than any resume would have. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder, and a dog barked from somewhere around the back and then went quiet. She was about to walk around to find the barn when the door opened. He was not what she'd expected either. She'd been told his name was Strand. What she hadn't been told was that he was somewhere in his early 40s, with the kind of face that looks like it's been argued with by weather for a long time and hasn't budged. He was wearing a canvas work shirt, and there was grease on one forearm, and he was holding a wrench the way most people hold a coffee mug, like he'd forgotten it was there. He looked at her. He didn't say anything. "I'm here about the position," Lena said. "The ad at the feed store in Pemberton." He looked at her truck, then back at her. "You know horses," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, what kind? Quarter horses mainly. Some thoroughbred. I can manage draft horses, but I don't prefer them." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile. More like a recalibration. "Why not?" "Because they're stubborn in a way that isn't interesting," she said. "Quarter horses are stubborn in a way that's at least honest." He was quiet for a moment. "Room and board," he said finally. "That means you're here for the season, not a weekend. I know what it means." He stepped back and opened the door wider. That was it. That was the entire interview. His Everett Strand. She learned that from the mail stacked on the kitchen table when he showed her the house. He didn't offer it. He showed her the spare room, a clean, bare space with a window that faced east, and a quilt folded at the foot of the bed that was so old, and carefully mended it, looked like a document. And he told her breakfast was at 5:30 if she wanted it, and that she didn't have to want it, and that the barn was the second outbuilding past the equipment shed, and she should introduce herself to the horses before she tried to work with them. "What are their names?" she asked. He told her. 4 horses. He remembered the names without pausing, and he told her one thing about each one. Not their temperament in general, but a specific thing, the kind of detail you only know if you've spent real time watching. The bay mare spooked at plastic bags, but not at gunshots. The gray gelding would lean into a brush if you started at his withers and worked back. She filed all of it away and didn't say anything except okay and noted, and something in his posture shifted, very slightly, like a door that hasn't been opened in a while giving just a little on its hinges. She didn't notice it then. She noticed it later, and she thought about it a lot, and she decided it was the moment things started. The first 2 weeks were almost entirely silent. Not uncomfortably so, or rather, it was uncomfortable at first, and then it wasn't. The way cold water is uncomfortable until you stop fighting it. Everett Strand was a man who spoke when there was something to say, and did not speak to fill air. Lena had spent most of her adult life in rooms where people talked constantly and said almost nothing, and she found that she liked the silence here better than she'd expected. She could think in it. She could hear herself think in it, which was something she hadn't been able to do in years. She worked hard. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She just knew the work and she did it, the way you do when something is genuinely yours. She was up before 5:30 every morning. She mucked stalls without being asked. She noticed that the fence along the north pasture had 3 posts leaning, and she mentioned it once, at dinner, and the next morning she went out and found the posts, the wire, and the tools she'd need already laid out near the fence line. She worked on it all day and finished it, and didn't say anything about it, and when he came by on his way back from the far field and looked at it, he looked at it for a long time, and then looked at her and said good, just the one word, and went inside. She stood there for a second. Something about the directness of it, the simple unadorned weight of it, went straight through her like a clean cold piece of weather. She didn't understand it then. She catalogued it and moved on. There was a boy who came on Wednesdays. His name was Gil. Everett's nephew, she gathered, from a sister in Kamloops who was going through something difficult. Gil was 12, and he had the particular social energy of a child who has learned not to ask for too much and compensates by being relentlessly cheerful about everything he does get. He attached himself to Lena on the second Wednesday with the straightforward logic of someone who has decided you're safe. "Do you know how to braid mane?" he asked her, standing at the gate to the paddock. "I do. Can you teach me?" "Sure." Jill turned out to be good with horses in the way some children are. Not careful, exactly, but respectful in a way that comes from instinct rather than instruction. He talked constantly while he worked, a bright running commentary on everything he was observing, and Lena learned more about Everett Strand in 3 Wednesday afternoons than she had in 2 weeks of living under his roof. She learned that Everett had run the ranch alone for 6 years. She learned that there had been a woman before who'd left. Not because of anything dramatic, Gil said, but because she'd wanted a different life and this one wasn't it, and Everett had not argued with her, which Gil seemed to find confusing, and Lena found quietly devastating in a way she couldn't fully explain. She learned that Everett had a reputation in the nearest town of being cold, closed off, difficult. She learned that Gil didn't think this was accurate. "He's just quiet," Gil said, matter-of-factly, braiding the bay mare's mane with new and careful hands. "People think quiet means cold. It doesn't." Lena thought about that for a long time. The thing she hadn't expected was how funny he was. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way that asked you to notice. Everett Strand had a dry, precise, almost invisible sense of humor that surfaced occasionally in a single sentence, delivered in exactly the same tone as everything else he said, and then was gone. The first time it happened, she almost missed it. He was describing a piece of equipment that had broken down for the 3rd time in a month, and he said, very quietly and very seriously, that he believed it had developed a philosophy, and she'd stopped walking and looked at him, and there was nothing on his face, but there was something in his eyes that was the closest thing to mischief she'd ever seen in a face that didn't otherwise show it. She laughed. A real laugh, not the polite kind. He looked away, but she was watching, and she saw it. The edge of something that might have been a smile, held back, contained, like he wasn't sure he was allowed it. She thought about that too. In the 4th week, she fell. Not badly. Her foot slipped on wet boards near the water trough, and she went down on one knee and the heel of her hand and scraped both. She was back up in a second, already moving, already telling herself she was fine, and then she heard him come around the corner of the barn, and she stood up straight and said, "I'm fine," before he'd even asked. He stopped. He looked at her hand. "Come inside," he said. "It's nothing. Your hand is bleeding. It's a scrape." He looked at her for a long moment, not impatiently, not with frustration, Just steadily, the way he looked at most things, like he was willing to wait, she went inside. He found the first aid kit without having to look for it, which meant it was always exactly where he kept it, which told her something. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, and he cleaned the scrape, and he put a bandage on it, and his hands were entirely steady and matter-of-fact, and she watched his face while he did it, and there was nothing in it except attention. Complete, quiet attention, the kind that most people never manage to give anything. She felt something that frightened her a little. "You don't have to," she started. "I know," he said. "I want to." He said it the same way he said everything, flat and direct and without drama. But she felt it go all the way down, and she looked at the table, and she didn't say anything else, and neither did he. And the kitchen was very quiet and very warm, and the mountains outside the window were going gold in the late afternoon light. She told herself it was nothing. She was good at that. What she hadn't told him, what she hadn't told anyone, really, because it wasn't the kind of thing you lead with, was why she'd left Vancouver. She'd been engaged. His name was Marcus Tully, and he was in finance, and he was charming in the way that makes you feel, for a long time, like you are the one who doesn't quite understand what's happening. He had not been cruel, not technically, not in any way you could point to in a clear-lit room. He had simply, steadily, over 4 years, made her feel like a problem that needed managing. Like her instincts were inconvenient. Like the person she was before she met him, the one who drove to stables at 6 in the morning and braided manes and felt most like herself when her hands smelled like hay, was someone embarrassing that needed to be quietly retired. She had given up so much of herself so gradually that she hadn't noticed until the morning she found herself standing in their apartment in her good work clothes, holding a coffee she hadn't made, and looking at a life that was perfectly arranged and had absolutely nothing of her in it. She'd called off the engagement that same day. He'd been surprised. She'd been surprised that he was surprised. She'd found the ad in Pemberton 3 weeks later and driven north and not looked back. She hadn't told any of this to Everett Strand. She didn't know why she was thinking about it now, sitting at his kitchen table with a bandage on her hand, while the light changed outside, except that she'd been here a month and she'd started to feel, very quietly, like herself again, and it made her realize how long she'd been away from that. She was grooming the gray gelding on a Thursday evening when she heard him come into the barn. She didn't look up. "You're good with him," he said. "He's a good horse. He doesn't let most people touch him like that." She looked up then. He was leaning against the stall door with his arms crossed, not in a closed way but in the way of someone who's been standing still for a while and found a position that works. "You said he likes to be brushed from the withers back," she said. "I did, so I do that." He nodded, slowly. He was quiet for a moment. "Why did you come here?" he said. Not unkindly, not like he thought he was owed an answer, just like he was asking because he genuinely wanted to know. She kept brushing. "I needed to go somewhere I could be useful," she said. "Somewhere it mattered whether I showed up or not." He said nothing for a moment. "It matters." She didn't look at him. "I know. I mean specifically," he said. "It matters specifically, not just to the ranch." She stopped brushing. The gelding shifted his weight and sighed, and she put her hand flat on his shoulder and felt his warmth and said, very quietly, "Okay, okay," he said. And that was all, and he pushed off the door and walked back out into the evening. And she stood there for a long moment, in the smell of hay and horses and the old particular comfort of a barn at dusk, and told herself, clearly and honestly, that she was in a great deal of trouble. She thought about leaving. This is the thing she doesn't talk about, but it happened. At the 6-week mark, when it became impossible to pretend she didn't feel what she felt, she lay awake in the east-facing room with its mended quilt, and she went through the logic very carefully. She'd come here to find herself, not to lose herself again in a different direction. Everett Strand was a man who'd watched someone leave and hadn't tried to stop her, which could mean he respected autonomy, or could mean he simply didn't feel things deeply enough to fight for them, and she couldn't tell which, and the uncertainty was the problem. She thought about Vancouver. She thought about the apartment and the coffee she hadn't made, and Marcus Tully's surprised face when she'd called it off. She thought about 4 years of shrinking. Then she thought about a bandage, applied with complete and quiet attention. She thought about it, matters specifically. She thought about a near smile held back, and wood stacked in perfect parallel rows, and the way he'd looked at the fence she'd mended. She got up at 4:30 in the morning and went out to the barn and stood in the dark with the horses, which is what she always did when she didn't know what else to do. He found her there an hour later. He didn't ask what she was doing. He just came and stood beside her at the paddock rail, close enough that she could have reached out and touched his arm. And they looked at the mountains going from black to gray to a pale and particular blue. And it was the most honest she'd felt in years, just standing there in the cold saying nothing. "I thought about leaving," she said. A long silence. "I know. How? I noticed you were somewhere else for a few days." She looked at him. "You notice things." "I pay attention to what matters." She turned back to the mountains. Her breath made small clouds in the cold. "I'm not leaving," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said, and it was the same word he'd used about the fence, the same single flat syllable, and it landed the same way, direct and complete, with nothing hidden in it and nothing withheld. She felt it go through her like light. The morning she understood him completely was a Saturday in October. It had been raining for 2 days. She was in the tack room repairing a bridle when she heard him come in, and then she heard a sound she hadn't heard before, a long, slow exhale, the kind that comes out of a person who has been holding something for a very long time and has run out of room for it. She looked up. He was standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands, and his face was doing something complicated that she recognized because she had made similar faces in her own mirror. "Sit down," she said. He sat on the old wooden bench along the wall. He looked at his hands. She went back to the bridle. She didn't ask. She had learned that he would talk when he was ready, and that trying to speed that up was like trying to speed up weather. After a while he said, "My sister called, Gil's mum. Yes, it's going to be longer than they thought. Whatever's happening down there. Okay, Gil's gonna be here through Christmas at least. Okay." He looked up. "You don't mind, I like Gil." He looked back at his hands. "He likes you. He thinks you're." He stopped. "What?" "He says you're the first person he's met who listens to him completely." She put the bridle down. "He's a good kid. He is." A pause. "He said the same about you, actually, that you listen completely." She looked at him. He was looking at her in a way he hadn't before. Or rather, she'd seen the look before, but she hadn't understood what it was, and now she did. It was the look of someone who has spent a long time behind glass and is working out, with some difficulty, whether the glass is still there. "Everett," she said. "Yes. Whatever you're trying to say, you can just say it." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the rain came down on the roof of the tack room with the steady, reliable rhythm of something that has been doing this for 1,000 years. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I know. I don't mean that as a warning. I mean it as information. I know the difference." He looked at the hat in his hands. "The last person who was here, who lived here, she left because I didn't give her enough. I didn't know how. I didn't know it was something she needed because I hadn't learned to ask." He paused. "I've thought about that for 6 years." She waited. "I don't want to do that again. Not because I'm afraid of the outcome. Because I don't want to be someone who doesn't know how to ask." "So ask," she said. He looked up. "Will you stay?" She looked at him for a long moment, at the face that had been argued with by weather and hadn't changed, at the hands that had cleaned her scrape with absolute steadiness, at the particular quality of his attention, which was the rarest thing she'd ever encountered in another person, and which she had been quietly starving for without knowing it. "Yes," she said. "I'll stay." He nodded. He put his hat on the bench beside him, and then he reached over and covered her hand with his, and they stayed like that while the rain came down, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing left that needed saying. That was 3 years ago. What she knows now that she didn't know then. Quiet is not the same as cold. Steady is not the same as closed. Some people take up all the air in a room and give you nothing. Some people give you everything without making a sound. Everett Strand gave her back herself. Not by fixing her. She hadn't needed fixing. Not by asking her to be different or smaller or easier to manage. Just by paying attention. Just by noticing. Just by saying it matters specifically in a barn at dusk in a voice that meant every single word. Gil is 16 now and can bridle a horse faster than either of them. He still talks constantly. He still tells them things they need to hear without knowing he's doing it. The fence along the north pasture has held for 3 years. She checks it every spring. The quilt on the east-facing bed is still there, still mended, more mended now than when she arrived. She thinks about the hands that repaired it. over and over, season after season, not because it was easy, but because it was worth keeping. She thinks about that a lot, actually. Some things are just worth keeping.